All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex, and I'm a former software engineer at Google. And today I'll be speaking about technical interviewing, behavioral interviews as well, and how that sort of shaped my career in a sense. I have a very unique background where doing really well on interviews really paid off for me. So I want to tell you that story. Before we go into all of that, I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of my career. So I graduated from the University of Windsor. I was a computer science major, and I was in the co-op program. So I basically got to work and study in alternating terms. I worked at IBM as an intern and also at Microsoft. After graduation, I managed to land a job at Google. I'll tell more about my experience interviewing there. And I worked there for 10 years. Some years I worked in the US, and then I came back to Canada 2022. And since November of last year, I sort of quit to sort of pursue something that I really enjoy, that I'm really passionate about, which is basically helping folks earlier in their careers that want to get into software engineering jobs, and specifically in tech companies. So I've interviewed at a lot of these companies. I was an interviewer myself at Google, and so I have a lot of insights into how interviewing works. And so I'll speak more about that as well. And so one thing that really sort of carried me through getting my internships, getting my job opportunities was the ability to do really well on interviews. And I think one thing that really helped me was preparing really well. In technical interviews, they usually ask some type of technical problem, and you're supposed to solve it within some time limit, right? And so a lot of these problems are shown in various websites. Before I graduated, LeetCode didn't exist. LeetCode is sort of like the standard website where there's lots of problems there and you can practice your structures and algorithms. But before then, there were a few websites like Project Euler, UVAs, SPOJ. I think they still exist, but they're not as prominent as LeetCode. And so I also did a lot of programming contests, and that's another theme that comes up in my university career, where I did a lot of these different programming competitions that allowed me to get a lot of simulated interviews, in a sense, where you're given 2 hours and solve as many problems as you can, type of thing. And so in each one of the slides that I'll be showing next, I'll be speaking about each year of university that I went through. I'll sort of show you two things. There's the icon for LeetCode, which will show you the amount of problems that I solved in all of these online judges during that time period. And I'll also be showing this trophy icon denoting the amount of contests that I was doing in that time period. So on my first year of university, I didn't have a lot of exposure to programming, other than in high school, I took a couple of courses. I wasn't really good at it, but going into university, I thought, okay, maybe I should teach myself something to get ahead. I had that summer free before fall. And so I taught myself C++C to start the year in a good note. I started doing a lot of these online judges, getting familiar with coding and all of those things. I solved about 65 problems in total that year. I was exposed to the ACM ICPC programming competition. This is a team-based competition that you do in universities. Here in the photo, it's myself and my two teammates and our coach, Dr. Kopti. If you go to University of Windsor, you probably know him. And then I also did a research project with a professor during the summer. We got a research grant to be able to do some work. And so my first year, in summary, is just getting familiar with some of these websites, just upskilling myself, learning how to code, basically, was sort of the theme there. On my second year, I had the fortunate position to have a scholarship with a university, and so I was able to do projects with professors. And so I was implementing graph algorithms, which is really fun. I continued doing solving problems in these online judges. I did about 64 problems. I still didn't feel super comfortable. I didn't think I had the right skills yet or the right tools to do well in contests, so I still haven't done any up until this point. But this is the part where I start applying for my first co-op work term. So I don't have all of my experience has been sort of academic or doing these sort of online competitions. Even then, I was able to pass the IBM interviews. They were not very technical in nature. They were more like, tell me about the projects that you have in your resume, or mostly behavioral. And so I was able to easily pass that, and I'll speak more about the format of those interviews later in the presentation. So for the IBM internship was my first actual work experience, so that was cool. However, the work was a bit boring. I was doing work that other full-time employees didn't want to do, writing unit tests and that sort of thing. this point, it was my first time in a while where I don't have homework to do. And so I have a lot of free time. And so I decided to use that time to grow in my technical skills and then do a lot of programming competitions and also solve a lot of problems. As you see, I solved over 350 problems during this, I think, 16-month period and participated in a lot of contests as well. So I felt like my skills were getting better. I felt more confident in my skills and started participating. During my third year of university, I come back during the fall and I started the competitive programming club at the university. So basically, it's just a bunch of us solving contests, participating in contests, discussing the solutions at the end. In this picture, it's our team participating in the ICM ICPC contest that was held at the University of Windsor. Fun fact, all these three guys, like our team, we all made it to Google. Chris and Matt that are shown here, they're still there. During this time, I also continued working on solving problems through the online judges. And I felt like this point I've taken data structures and starting to take advanced data structures. So I have more tools still to be able to solve more and more difficult problems. And since I worked at IBM, I thought, let's take a bigger step and try to apply to more well-known companies, more well-known brands like Microsoft and Amazon. I was able to land interviews there. I had phone interviews, and I'll tell you the format later. I was able to get 2 offers, and I went to Microsoft because they paid a little bit better. During my Microsoft internship, I was doing similar role I was doing at IBM. I was a software engineer in test. Again, not the work that I really wanted to work, but who's going to reject a company like Microsoft, right? I was able to learn a lot of new things because it's for the first time I'm working on the Microsoft stack, so C#, PowerShell, things like this. It was an extremely fun summer. The Microsoft invests a lot of money into their internship program, so they host a lot of different events, so you can meet other interns, and I took full advantage of that. At this point, I'm not trying to have fun. I'm not doing a lot of contests. I'm not solving a lot of LeetCode problems. 4th year of university, the time where you start applying for full-time opportunities. So that fall semester is very important to prepare, start applying for jobs. So I continue working on these online judges, contests. I continue working with professors on various projects. And I had the opportunity to interview at 2 big tech companies, so Amazon and Google. And so I'll speak a little bit more about my experience at Google. So at this point, the way that they did interviews back then was you have to write code on a whiteboard. So I was fairly familiar with doing that. And also, there were no such thing as virtual interviews. Nowadays, you have a video call with someone. There might be some type of online ID where you write your code. But here, you basically just show up in person. You're face-to-face with a human in an interviewer, and they ask you a question, and you write code in the whiteboard. So it's a great experience to be flown out to San Francisco. At the time, I was a poor student, so I didn't have money to go there, and all the expenses were paid. So all my flights, my transportation, food, everything. So that was really cool. And I spent one day in the Google campus, and they gave me a bunch of different problems back to back, grilling me about many different technical concepts and many different questions, which some of them are listed here. In total, I did I would say I did more than this, but more than 600 problems in total, and probably about 150 contests, right? I'm not counting things like Google Code Jam or Facebook Hacker Cup, things that I also participated in. But as you can see, I felt very confident going into interviews such as Google's because I did so many of these problems, and a lot of these problems are usually harder than you would see in the actual interviews. And so I felt that I was also very passionate about solving these types of problems. I get dopamine hits just from solving them. And so I feel like I got kind of lucky in that way. But one thing that you should know is that your mileage may vary, right? So I really liked solving the problems. I wouldn't have done them as well, even if I didn't have to interview at a company or the interview process didn't ask these type of questions. And so just because it worked for me doesn't mean it'll work for you. Nowadays, interviews are a bit different, and they may evolve in the future due to LLMs and AI. There are other people that I know that made it to Google or other big tech companies without going through the amount of preparation that I did, right? For example, Chris and my teammates on the IBM competition, they didn't do as many problems as me. And also, spending that much time on something like this may not necessarily pay off in the future. If you're a great competitive programmer, that doesn't necessarily translate to being a great software engineer. Here, I'm showing some code that I wrote for a contest. As you can see, there's a bunch of macros to sort of minimize the amount of keystrokes that I'm typing. And overall, the code, it's not something that you would see in production written by real software engineers, right? Tested during an interview and things that you would do in the industry. So, for example, problem solving and coding is something that's really important in terms of doing solving LeetCode problems, and also you use it in your job, right? But things like speed are more important in competitive programming. You want to solve the problem as quick as possible so you get the most amount of points. That's not something that, say, in the industry they really care about. They care about shipping products fast, but it's not to the point where 1 minute difference would make a whole lot of difference, right? And so in industry, they care more about code reliability, code quality, collaborating with other engineers. And so there's some overlap, but make sure that you don't overly emphasize in technical interviews because it doesn't translate. A lot of those skills don't translate to real world experience. Like I said before, it's not all about grinding LeetCode. So I solved over 800 problems before I got into Google, but that doesn't mean you'll get hired. Problem solving and coding are not the only signals that interviewers care about. There are a bunch of other things that they care about. So, for example, testing. So can you go over your code and find any bugs in it, right? You're not expected to be perfect and have perfect code, but if you do if there's a bug in your code, you are expected to find the issue by yourself. Growth mindset, for example, if I give you feedback or if I give you a hint, how do you respond to that? Do you dismiss the hint? Does it fly over your head? And so growth mindset is actually very important for early career or for internships, because those are the types of skills that interviewers or companies want to see. Someone that doesn't have a static mindset, but someone that is willing to grow, that has potential and can learn a lot of technical topics. Communication is a big one, right? So we don't care too much if you solve only the problem. You want to be able to explain your thought process, how you arrived at the solution, why does the solution work, and be able to talk about your solution in general, because that's how you'll be working in the industry. You'll be working in teams, you'll be collaborating and working on a solution together. And also efficacy is very important. You might be able to do this in 3 hours, but you have to do it within 1 hour, at least for interviews. And so being able to do things or solve problems efficiently or fast is very important. And of course, coding, for example, problem solving, we want to see your ability to break down problems into smaller subproblems. We want to make sure you have the right tools, right data structures and algorithms to solve problems. We want to test that. And then your coding, how do you translate those ideas into actual code? Do you know your coding language very well? Do you write self-documenting code, right? All of these things are going to be evaluated on technical interviews. So here's more or less the structure that you would have in the technical interview. Usually they're about 45 minutes, maybe an hour in length. The first couple of minutes will be, you'll have some introductions. So you basically want to have some type of elevator pitch about yourself. You want to introduce yourself, your name, what school you go to, different types of projects that you have worked on in the past, maybe why you like the company that you're applying for. Interviewer will probably do the same. And then they may ask you something about your resume, your background, the project that you've worked on recently, just to sort of break the ice. After that, we go through the main technical question. So you're going to be given a problem. Usually it's sort of vague in nature, and so you have to get more details about the problem. You want to ask clarifying questions about the outputs and make sure you're in the same page with the interviewer in terms of what is being asked of you, right? After what's been asked of you, you understand the question that's been asked, then you want to sort of design a couple of solutions. So maybe you come up with some brute force approach, maybe the first thing that comes to mind, and then maybe you do something to the input to make it more efficient to solve it in some other manner. So usually you want to have at least 2 possible ways of solving the problem, and you want to sort of evaluate them, compare them against each other. So you can say something like the brute force approach, it's very inefficient. My other approach, it uses more memory, but the runtime complexity is a lot lower. So you have to make some decision on which solution you want to code. based on the constraints of the problem. So you need to be asking about what is the size of my arrays, or how big can the integers be, or things that would help you determine what's the best course of action to take. Once you've decided on a solution, then you want to code it, right? So you want to implement your ideas and start coding it in your favorite or your programming language that you best. As you're coding, you need to also speak about what your thought process is, what you're planning to do. Maybe deconstruct your code into various phases, maybe write some comments saying this is step 1, step 2, step 3, and then just go through all of those. And make sure that if there are any assumptions about what you're writing, or if you're stuck, you ask for help or communicate what you're struggling with so that the interviewer can step in and maybe help you out if they need to. The next step is, after you write your code, you want to sort of test it. So you want to go line by line, evaluate your variables, and try to find any mistakes that there might be in there. If you find anything, come up with some approaches to fix them, and fix if you're able to. And at the end, you can speak about the runtime complexity. So if the solution is it runs in linear time or log n time, any ways to optimize the code, or maybe you could refactor some code into some helper function, or maybe you can optimize in terms of how efficient the solution is. So talk about some of these points. They might be brought by the interviewer. And depending on how much time there's left, they may ask you to solve a different problem, or maybe they change the problem that was given to you in a little bit. Say, assume that input is of this format, how would you solve the problem then, right? So be aware that this might happen. They might throw you some curveballs just to see how you'd react, or how much stuff do you know. And then there might be a Q&A at the end. Usually candidates are just running very low on time and the Q&A is skipped. But if there's 5 minutes left, they may give you the opportunity to ask some questions. And so this time you should have done some research on the company. You can ask them about the culture at the company, any projects that this person has been working on, or things that you generally want to learn about the company to see if it's the right fit for you. In terms of interview preparation, you need to master the DSA fundamentals. So there's many different topics that you can learn. I've listed out some common topics here. Make sure you the trade-offs between these, right? When do I use a linked list versus when do I use an array? When do I use hash maps? So that when the time comes, you get an interview question, you can identify which one of these you can use or is the most efficient to use. In terms of how to practice these, there are websites like LeetCode where they categorize the problem by topic. And so if you're really weak on hash maps, then maybe you can just focus on the hash maps topics or the question set, so you can get more practice on those. Then there's the behavioral interview process. So I spoke in length about the more technical process, but for the behavioral, it's more about learning about what you have done in the past, how you've collaborated with teammates, basically looking in for any red flags in terms of how do you conduct yourself in your company, in your previous projects, internships, hackathons, anything like that. So usually the questions are of the form, tell me about a time when something happened, or you had a conflict with a teammate, or when you had to take over the leadership of a project, right? And so you have to collect lots of stories about different experiences that you had in your internships or projects, whatever, so that you can speak about them at length during the interview. Usually for people that are very earlier in their careers and may not have a lot of work experience, then you have to sometimes answer in a more hypothetical way. So basically, what would you do if that situation arose? And then you have to give a reasonable response as to what that might be. In terms of how to answer the questions, there's something called STAR format, which is a framework used to describe, give a lot of context into what you worked on. So for example, STAR is an acronym for situation, action, and result. And so you want to basically describe the problem that you were trying to solve with context into responsible for, what were you contributing towards that project, then action, what action did you take, and then result, what was the final outcome of your action. And so let's look at an example really quick. I know we're sort of running out of time, but the situation, it might be that you're trying to build some type of solution for small businesses to do support requests for their app through texting, right? And perhaps the task was that you were responsible for the NLP system, integrating with testing API, so you could text with a chatbot and get real-time help. In terms of actions, you can sort of describe the actual libraries or frameworks that you use to sort of solve the problem. So in this case, you can use Spacey to build an intent classifier and entity extractor connected to the Twilio's API. We define 10 common use cases like password resets to test the chatbot. And the end result, maybe the chatbot answered 93% of test queries correctly, handle everything reliably. It was well received, and you learn a lot during this hackathon experience. So that's a STAR framework. It's a way to frame your answers, which is very beneficial because a lot of interviewers want to get details about what you did, what your contributions were, and not your team's contributions, and the final impact of the work that you performed. In terms of how to practice for interviews, there's a couple of things you can do. At least for technical, I'll focus on technical. You can do so by yourself. So you can go to a website like LeetCode. You can tackle the easy problems first. Try to solve them within 30 minutes before you do more difficult problems. You want to focus on just being able to solve the problems. So maybe it takes you an hour to solve a problem, that's okay. But the more practice you get, the faster you'll become at solving these. You should be timing yourself. So give yourself maybe 30 to 45 minutes to solve the problems. Try to speak out loud. So try to simulate the environment of an interview where you're trying to explain your thought process to someone else. In LeetCode, you can ask for hints. They have that capability, so that's nice if you're stuck. And then look at the solution if you're not able to solve it, and try to self-assess why you were not able to solve it. Was it because you didn't know the data structure to solve it, or it didn't come to mind, or what happened there? Another good way to practice is through mock interviews. So trying to get someone else to act as an interviewer, and then you act as the interviewee. That sort of simulates the interview environment very well. So you want to try to find a friend or some mentor or someone that you trust that can give you actionable feedback on how you do on the interview. I highly recommend pairing up with someone and swapping roles. So you both do interviewer and interviewee, because as an interviewee, sometimes it's very easy to miss what you have done wrong. But when you see someone else struggling through the interview, you can say, oh, I think this happens to me as well, right? So put yourself in the position of conducting the interview. I think that can really help. If you're not able to find a friend or a mentor, there are also paid services where you can get this type of experience. Thank you, Cheryl, for putting the links in the chat. And I provide these services as well. So if you're interested, feel free to contact me. Thank you so much for listening. I'm just leaving here a QR code that links to my LinkedIn account if you want to get in touch with me and just chat about anything else. But otherwise, thank you, My Path to Tech, for sort of inviting me to this presentation. It was really fun.